The crowd fell silent as a man in a Marine uniform stepped onto the stage. But it wasn't Tyler. On his chest gleamed the very medals everyone thought had been destroyed. A gust of wind caught the corner of a black folder, scattering papers to the ground, backdated permits, private emails, and wire transfers to an account no one was supposed to know about. Someone in the crowd shouted, "They knew this whole time!" But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The late afternoon sun cast long fractured shadows across the front yard, illuminating the spot where Tyler's shadow box had once rested like a beacon of honor. Now, only the imprint in the porch dust remained, a clean rectangular void surrounded by scuff marks and a few torn scraps of patriotic ribbon. Jason stood there, motionless, as if the air itself had thickened around him. The silence, broken only by the mechanical screech of the garbage truck shifting gears down the block, was unbearable. Something sacred had been desecrated, and the world had gone on spinning as if it were nothing. His boots crunched over the driveway gravel as he moved toward the overflowing green bin at the edge of the cul-de-sac, heart pounding, throat dry. What he saw when he looked inside made his stomach twist. Tyler's dress blues, the deep navy fabric now mottled with grease stains and soda residue, were half buried beneath pizza boxes, cat litter, and a wet newspaper clinging to the medals like some mocking shroud. The buttons were scratched. The insignia was bent. His son's combat service ribbon had been snapped in two. Jason reached in without thinking, pulling the case out slowly, gingerly, as if handling a broken piece of stained glass. The corner of the box, now cracked, dug into his palm. A bit of chicken bone fell from between the folds of the uniform. He blinked hard. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the furious restraint of someone holding back something volcanic. That's when he heard her heels clicking. Deborah Sterling stood smugly across the sidewalk, arms folded over a bright coral blouse that seemed offensively cheerful. Her thin lips curled as she watched Jason retrieve what her order had condemned to rot. She didn't flinch, didn't waver, only said, "The HOA regulations are clear. No political or military displays visible from the curb. You were warned in writing." Jason met her eyes, not with fury, not even with words, just a silence heavy enough to press bone to marrow. A silence that said, "You've just picked the wrong hill to die on." His voice, when it finally came, was low and surgical. That wasn't a display. That was a memory. That was a uniform worn by a boy who bled for this country while you complained about mailbox paint. Deborah huffed, turned, and walked away. Jason stood there as the sun began to set, the mangled blues clutched to his chest, and for the first time in years, he realized something. He wasn't angry because she broke a rule. He was angry because she broke something sacred. And worse, she didn't even understand what she'd done. The house had never felt so still. The kind of stillness that didn't offer peace, only the echo of something shattered. Tyler's bedroom door remained closed, light leaking beneath it like the last breath of a dying fire. Occasionally, Jason heard movement. A chair creak, a heavy exhale, but no words, no requests, no sound of life continued. The park at the heart of Fairgrove Estates had never seen a crowd like this. Folding chairs covered the grass like a field of resolve. Flags flanked the perimeter in a strict, respectful row, and a temporary wooden platform stood at the center, simple, no frills, deliberate. It wasn't a celebration, it was a reckoning. The air was tense with anticipation, not joy. Veterans in dress uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder, their medals catching the morning sun in brief flashes like steel winking in battle. Neighbors came in silence, many of them with shame still written on their faces, some complicit in silence, others too afraid to challenge the HOA when it mattered. Today, they would see what silence had cost. Across the street, the windows of the HOA building were conspicuously dark. Deborah Sterling had declined comment to the press the day before, claiming she was the target of harassment by militant political groups. But no one was listening anymore. At 11 o'clock a.m. sharp, the ceremony began. 3 Marines marched onto the platform with slow, precise steps. In their arms, a new shadow box wrapped in protective velvet. Inside it, a freshly tailored set of dress blues, complete with campaign ribbons, medals, rank insignia, and white gloves folded beneath. Every detail was immaculate. Every thread spoke of honor. Tyler was called to the stage, his gait stiff at first, like a man stepping back into a fire that once burned him. But when he reached the podium and saw the Marines flanking him, something in his posture changed. The stiffness gave way to pride, not the boastful kind, but the kind earned in deserts and danger. The Marine captain who followed him spoke with a calm fury that cut deeper than any shouting could. "These colors," he said, tapping the shoulder of his own dress blues, "do not belong to a party. They do not belong to a regulation. They belong to a legacy. When a uniform is discarded like garbage, what's thrown away is more than cloth. its memory, its sacrifice, its blood, and we will remember who tossed it. Then, with deliberate clarity, he turned to the cameras positioned along the edge of the field. "We don't demand apologies," he said. "We demand standards, and this community failed." The words fell like a gavel. Then came the petition, quietly handed to the captain, then raised into view. 287 signatures, he announced, calling for the immediate resignation of the Fairgrove HOA board for gross misconduct and public disrespect of active military. The crowd erupted, not in chaos but in catharsis, and just when it seemed the air couldn't hold any more, Jason Carter stepped forward, flanked by a county official and a man in a suit holding a legal binder. "We're not just asking for resignations," Jason said, his voice steady, iron-wrapped. "We've begun the process to revoke the HOA's charter under the clause for moral negligence and reputational harm." There were no cheers, just silence, heavy, final, and somewhere in one of the darkened windows across the street, a curtain shifted. The resignation letter was short. 3 paragraphs of corporate detachment masquerading as regret. Deborah Sterling didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the uniform. She cited external pressures and ongoing hostility as reasons for stepping down, never naming the disgrace that had eclipsed her once feared authority. But it didn't matter. Her nameplate was removed from the HOA office door before noon, and her legacy, if it could be called that, was buried beneath layers of public record, revoked authority, and collective relief. With her departure, the neighborhood exhaled. The reign of threats over mailbox colors and seasonal flags ended not with rebellion, but with reform. The new board, elected by an overwhelming margin, was built not on power, but on principle. Veterans took the lead, joined by retirees who remembered what neighborliness used to mean, and young parents who simply wanted a future free from fear of arbitrary fines and creeping control. One of the first acts passed unanimously, a clause protecting the right to honor military service without restriction, interference, or bureaucratic harassment. For Tyler, the change ran deeper than policy. He wasn't just walking taller. He was leading. What had been broken in him wasn't simply healed. It had been reforged into something harder, stronger. He launched weekend mentoring sessions for neighborhood teens, teaching them not only discipline and respect, but what it meant to protect something worth believing in. He took them on runs. He taught them how to read a map, how to speak with intent, how to stand when the world wanted them to kneel. And every Memorial Day, Tyler stood at attention in his new dress blues, flanked by neighbors young and old, in front of the plaque his father had carved by hand. The message was simple, but its meaning ran deep. In honor of those who serve, this home welcomes you. It was more than sentiment. It was a line in the sand. Jason, watching his son from the porch, knew he hadn't won a battle. He had preserved a principle. He didn't go looking for confrontation. But when it came for his son's dignity wrapped in red, white, and blue, he answered like any father would, with unflinching resolve. Fairgrove thought it was silencing a complaint. It didn't realize it had awoken a force built on loyalty, service, and brotherhood. They didn't just pick the wrong fight. They declared war on a Marine. And the Corps doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It responds.